Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. We have no guests tonight, so you're stuck with just me. I'm Kenny McBride. And we start with Brexit news, unsurprisingly, following last night's rather strange and slightly disturbing scenes in Westminster as Parliament was officially prorogued. A cross-party group of MPs today has formally launched a campaign to win support in the Commons for Brexit via a managed deal, arguing that both a no-deal departure or a second referendum would cement political divisions and cause political uncertainty. The organisers say that up to 50 MPs so far will back the plan. Stephen Kinnock, the Labour MP whose amendment to the bill to prevent withdrawal added the clause about the particular form of letter that Boris Johnson should send to the EU, said that the group was not about reproducing a carbon copy of May's deal, but instead would be modelled on the results of the failed cross-party talks between May's government and Labour that happened back in March. He said there would be a consensual focus aiming... Okay. 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 If anyone is watching, we do apologise. We're having a few technical difficulties here. Okay. Try again. Okay. Weird. Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Kenny McBride. Sadly, we have no guest tonight, so it's just me with the news. We start, unsurprisingly, with Brexit news, following last night's rather strange and slightly disturbing scenes in Westminster as Parliament was formally prorogued. A cross-party group of MPs today formally launched a campaign to win support in the Commons for Brexit via a managed deal, arguing that both no-deal departure or a second referendum would cement political divisions in the country and cause endless uncertainty. As many as 50 MPs so far back the plan, and Stephen Kinnock, the Labour MP whose amendment was added to that bill the other night to prevent the no-deal departure, has said that the group is not about reproducing a carbon copy of May's 3 times rejected plan. Instead, he said it would be modelled on the results of failed cross-party talks between May's government and Labour back in March, but with a consensual focus aiming to bring a deal that Johnson could negotiate with the EU and then get through the Commons. At a launch event at Parliament, Kinnock said, "The fact is, we are rooted in reality here. This is not a unicorn. We have something here that is the basic foundation of a perfectly pragmatic deal that we believe can command a majority in Parliament and also begin to reunite our deeply divided country. And even at this 11th hour, we believe there is time to do it." He said it did not mean that the MPs would support any deal, saying, "I don't think this is about a carte blanche." Caroline Flint, who's one of the leading Labour backbenchers, warning against Labour's move towards backing a second referendum, said the group could countenance a Brexit delay until 31st of January, but only if this was focused on securing a deal. The aim of the group, she said, was to show that there is a sizable voice building across the House to secure a deal, and that we may not be as loud as some voices, but we are a voice of reason, trying to work through the process, holding all sides to account. Amongst the other MPs who were at the launch event, Rory Stewart said that if we were to go for a no-deal Brexit, we would have about half the country very angry and alienated. They would feel about no-deal Brexit the way that many of the people I've seen recently in the North East feel about Mrs. Thatcher. On the other side, if we went for a full Remain through a second referendum, you would have about half the country feeling incredibly alienated, angry and tricked. Norman Lamb, the sole Liberal Democrat MP involved, said he was hopeful that with Johnson now mandated under law to seek an extension to Brexit if he cannot find a deal, this could be an escape route for the PM. He said, he's completely got himself boxed in. He has to find a way out of this mess, and this is the way out of the mess. Meanwhile, in Europe, there have been discussions about what might be able to break the deadlock, and the EU or people from the EU have said that they're pinning hopes on British negotiators agreeing to a Northern Ireland only backstop, the idea that was previously rejected by Theresa May as a threat to the constitutional integrity of the UK. EU sources said that there was no other approach that could work with the negotiations because they were otherwise doomed to hit at what they called a zombie stage, given that they now predict that there will be a general election very soon. We don't know what mandate the Prime Minister has to propose something, and obviously there is a strong division between the Parliament and the government, said Nathalie Loiseau, former French Minister of EU Affairs. The UK government has said that it's very unlikely that this would happen. They've said we are not seeking a Northern Ireland only backstop. That's from a Number 10 spokesman today. Meanwhile, the newly nominated EU Commissioner for Trade, Phil Hogan, who's a former Irish minister, told the Irish Times he believed the penny is finally dropping in Johnson's government over the lack of alternatives. The Prime Minister has previously described the arrangement involving the Irish backstop as undemocratic and railed against signing a treaty that would be what he said was inconsistent with the sovereignty of the UK by tying it permanently into a customs union. However, the Prime Minister has proposed in recent days the idea of a single all-Ireland agri-food zone, and that has given some hope to people in the EU that a deal keeping just Northern Ireland within the structures of the EU might be possible. Theresa May, whose government was reliant on the support of the Democratic Unionist Party for a working majority, had rejected Northern Ireland alone staying in the single market and customs union, saying that no British Prime Minister could accept such a border being drawn in the Irish Sea. But Phil Hogan said that Johnson, who visited with the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar in Dublin on Monday, had offered some grounds for optimism in his recent talks. He said, Mr Johnson has made a proposal in the last few days talking about an all-Ireland food zone. That is certainly a clear indication of divergence between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and the EU and the rest of the UK. This is the first time that this has been spoken about by a British Prime Minister, where they are prepared to accept some level of divergence between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. If we can build on that, we certainly might get closer to one another in terms of a possible outcome. Hogan did warn, however, that the proposal that Johnson had made about an agri-food zone would not necessarily be enough. He said it would have to include all goods in terms of any agreement. He said, I remain hopeful that the penny is finally dropping with the UK, that there are pragmatic and practical solutions that can actually be introduced into the debate at this stage, albeit at the 11th hour, that may find some common ground between the EU and the UK. The Taoiseach has indicated in the last 24 hours that the Northern Ireland only backstop is quite an interesting area to revisit. Following Hogan's nomination on Tuesday by the European Commission designate Ursula von der Leyen, Hogan is set to take over any trade talks with the UK once the country leaves the bloc, with the former Deputy Chief EU negotiator Sabine Weyand as his Director General. Hogan said that the establishment of a new negotiating team will probably take 6 to 8 months once we know what the outcome of the present negotiations are. Then I expect it will take a number of years before we conclude the negotiations. The divorce proceedings have to be completed before the future relationship, which would include a free trade agreement, Hogan said. But we will not be starting from scratch in the case of the UK because they have been part of the EU for the last 45 years. I expect that we will be able to move more quickly than we would in any other trade negotiations. Meanwhile, in London, there has been growing concern about the role of Dominic Cummings in the government. Since Boris Johnson won the role of Prime Minister in July, Britain's Brexit crisis has become persistently more furious, and many people are blaming that, at least in part, on Dominic Cummings' ruthless bravura. Investors and allies have said that they've been left bewildered by an array of decisions that diplomats have compared to the disorienting style of US President Donald Trump. Johnson said on Tuesday that he would not request an extension to Brexit, hours after a law came into force demanding that he delay until 2020 unless he can strike a deal. Before its suspension, Parliament refused Johnson's demand for a snap election. Cummings, who's been regarded as the puppet master of Brexit and has been cast by people variously as an anarchist, as Britain's Rasputin, or as a political vandal, was quite serene on today as the Brexit chaos continued. When he was asked what his next move would be on Brexit, Cummings told Reuters, "You guys should get outside London and go talk to people who are not rich Remainers." I presume somebody told him to come to Scotland and visit some of us. Asked if the United Kingdom would leave on October 31st, the 47-year-old Oxford graduate said, "Sure." So Johnson says he does say he can get a deal on the last day of the October 17th to 18th EU summit. Given that there is so little time left, any deal would in effect be a modified version of the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May agreed last November. One Brexiteer said, "Boris will try to ram through a modified withdrawal agreement. He'll pivot to trying to get a deal." Goldman Sachs at this stage says its base case was a deal giving it a 45% probability, but raised its no deal probability to 25% from 20% and lowered its probability of no Brexit from 30 to 35%. "We think the Prime Minister will re-engage in Brexit negotiations with the EU, aiming to confront MPs in late October with a binary choice between a Brexit deal and a pre-Brexit general election," said Goldman Sachs. But the lack of any majority in Parliament has reduced the inclination of the EU to negotiate, and even if Johnson did get a deal, he would clearly have some difficulty ratifying it. As one EU official noted, there is no majority in the House of Commons for anything that Johnson wants to do. "We have no other choice but to see if we can get a deal with them, but so far the UK side has not put anything on the table that would make us think that this is really what they're aiming at," the official said. Dominic Cummings, who alongside fellow campaigner Matthew Elliott drove the Vote Leave victory in the 2016 referendum, is cast by allies as a ruthless strategist who cares little for the conventions of traditional politics. He provoked a row inside Westminster this week when he sacked a 27-year-old advisor to Finance Minister Sajid Javid. The advisor, Sonia Khan, was escorted by armed police from Downing Street without Javid's knowledge. Former Prime Minister John Major cast Cummings as an overmighty political anarchist who should be sacked as Johnson's de facto Chief of Staff before he poisoned British politics beyond repair. Cummings' response was "Trust the people," a slogan he's used to cast Johnson's Brexit supporting team as the true servants of the people, fighting a London political and financial elite that wants to thwart their will. I think we can probably all see some of the irony in Boris Johnson being cast as fighting against the political elite of London. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said on Monday that the United Kingdom was in dangerous territory as voters were concluding that Parliament was hindering Brexit. He said the government would respect the law, but that interpretations of the law can sometimes be complex. At this point, our view is that resignation is the most likely, said the US investment bank JP Morgan. In our view, neither seeking to defy the law nor encouraging the EU not to grant an extension are likely to succeed. However, we have heard that France, at least, has said that without significant progress, without some sign of what is to be negotiated between now and the end of January, that any further extension is still quite unlikely. And meanwhile, in London, Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson have been discussing the need for the government's public internet service to gather more targeted and personalised information. In a move that has alarmed Whitehall officials, the Prime Minister has instructed departments to share data they collect about usage of the gov.uk portal so that it can feed into preparations for leaving the EU at the end of next month. Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's chief advisor, emailed senior officials instructing them to make sure that ministers, department heads and political aides know that the instruction is top priority, according to leaked government documents. In a personal minute on 19th of August to members of the Cabinet's EU Exit Operations Committee, which is responsible for no-deal preparations, Johnson said centralised data was also necessary to accelerate his ambitions for a digital revolution in public services. I expect everyone to act immediately to execute the above actions, Johnson wrote. Any delays were to be reported to his office right away. Cummings reiterated the urgency of the direction in an email to senior officials on August 28th, saying, "We must get this stuff finalised ASAP, and there are many interdependencies resting on this happening." The PM says his office must be informed of anything that will delay the plan by 24 hours, and CDL will deal with any problems or delays today. A government spokesman told BuzzFeed News that across the industry it is normal for organisations to look at how their websites are used to make sure they provide the best possible service. Individual government departments currently collect anonymised user data when people use gov.uk. The Government Digital Service is working on a project to bring this anonymous data together to make sure people can access all the services they need as easily as possible. No personal data is collected at any point during the process, and all activity is fully compliant with our legal and ethical obligations. However, several people have shown significant concern about this. Javier Ruiz Diaz, the head of policy at the Open Rights Group, told BuzzFeed News, "Secret orders are not the way to handle these complex policies that have generated huge controversies in the past. We need consultation and public debate to build social consensus for any new gathering of personal data, including appropriate safeguards." Meanwhile, Gavin Freegard, head of Transparency and Data at the Institute for Government think tank, said citizens have a right to know how their data is being used. Government should be having the debates and discussion about the appropriate use of data in public with the public, rather than sending secret notes to cabinet committees. Labour, meanwhile, said it was suspicious of the urgency and timing of the demand, given that it came as Downing Street was preparing for a political showdown over Brexit and potentially a general election. Tom Watson, the Labour deputy leader, said, "These leaked memos should set off serious alarm bells. How does profiling citizens help with no-deal preparation? Why is government prioritising it when we are just 6 weeks away from Boris Johnson's own Brexit deadline? And why the threat to departments that refuse to comply? Given Dominic Cummings' focus on data science in the Vote Leave campaign, this sudden urgent need for big data collection is extremely concerning. We need immediate clarity about how citizens' data will be protected and assurances that it won't be misused for party political purposes." And also today, the SNP have said that the Tories clearly see the writing on the wall, as Bill Grant became the latest Tory MP to announce that he will quit, following Scottish Tory leader Ruth Davidson and a host of Tory MPs from across the UK. Tommy Shepherd MP said the Tories had completely failed to stand up for Scotland, voting for Westminster cuts to Scotland's budget and Boris Johnson's reckless plans for an extreme Brexit against the will of the people of Scotland. Polls show that the support for the Tories in Scotland has collapsed. Last week, a YouGov poll of the 13 Tory seats in Scotland had support for the SNP up to 42%, with the Tories falling 12 points behind on 30%, suggesting that the SNP could potentially win all 13 seats from the Tories. In a separate YouGov poll of voting intentions across Scotland, this poll was done for The Times, overall support for the SNP was at 43%, with the Tories down on 20% and Labour on 15%. At the European elections in May, of course, the Tories had their worst ever result in Scotland, coming fourth with just 11% of the vote. Tommy Shepherd said, "The Tories clearly see the writing on the wall and are jumping ship before they can be turfed out by the people of Scotland at the coming election. Unlike the SNP, Tory MPs have completely failed to stand up for Scotland. Every time they have had the chance to vote against Boris Johnson's extreme Brexit, they have bottled it and obeyed their orders from Downing Street. Not one of them had the guts to stand up to Boris Johnson and expose his reckless no-deal plans that threatened to be ruinous for the Scottish economy. Voters will remember that. It's no wonder support for the Tories is collapsing. They have cut Scotland's budget and want to impose a devastating Brexit, which could cause a recession, destroy 100,000 Scottish jobs, and inflict lasting harm on living standards, public services, and the economy. Once the threat of a no-deal Brexit is off the table, there must be an early election so we can get rid of the Tories. The SNP will be putting Scotland's opposition to Brexit and our right to choose our own future at the heart of that contest. And today, Ross Greer called for the abolition of the Home Office, blaming its institutional racism. Speaking after a Scottish Parliament debate earlier today on immigration and the impact of the UK government's recently announced 3-year European temporary leave to remain policy on Scottish universities and colleges, the Greens education spokesperson said, "The UK government has suspended Parliament in an attempt to force through its racist, retrograde vision of Brexit. As of today, the Scottish Parliament is the most senior body currently sitting in these islands holding the Tories to account, and that is exactly what we will do. The Home Office has deported people who had every right to live here. Whistleblowers have accused it of lying to other EU states as they deported human trafficking victims. It continues to imprison children who have committed no crime in immigration detention centres, and its repeated incompetence has devastated thousands of lives. This is a government department rotten to its core. It cannot be fixed, it must be abolished, and its responsibilities broken up before its racist culture is inflicted on millions of European citizens currently shielded by their rights under freedom of movement. Devolving immigration and asylum powers to the Scottish Parliament would at least shield us from this cruelty, allowing us not only to set policies in Scotland's social and economic interests, but to treat everyone who comes here with basic human dignity." The Tories' 3-year temporary leave to remain proposals show clearly the combination of contempt and incompetence at the heart of their immigration agenda. Scottish universities offer 4-year, not 3-year degrees. They know this, and yet they will not change their plans. Scotland's universities and colleges, our students and staff, deserve so much better than this. And we certainly hope that is a policy that can be changed. Obviously, it makes no sense for 3-year agreements for Scotland when we have 4-year degrees. So this is an ongoing battle. Many of you will know that this has been an ongoing campaign for the Scottish Government for several years now. And we do hope that we will see some resolution soon because, as Ross Greer says, it's simply unconscionable. In international news, though, going beyond Brexit for the first time tonight, Donald Trump has fired his national security advisor, John Bolton, apparently over foreign policy disagreements. Donald Trump said, "I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House. I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions, as did others in the administration," Trump tweeted today. He added that he would name a replacement sometime next week. Bolton is a well-known foreign policy hawk. He was Trump's 3rd national security advisor, and he was widely known to have pressed the president for a harder line on issues such as North Korea. He was also an architect of Trump's strident stance against Iran and had also advocated a tougher approach on Russia and Afghanistan. Bolton took up the post in April 2018, replacing H.R. McMaster, and he had sometimes been at odds with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is one of Trump's leading loyalists. Offering a different version of events than Trump, Bolton tweeted, "I offered to resign last night, and President Trump said, 'Let's talk about it tomorrow.'" Trump had sometimes joked about Bolton's image as a warmonger, reportedly saying in one Oval Office meeting that John has never seen a war he doesn't like. Trump's North Korea envoy, Stephen Biegun, is among the names floated as possible successors. Biegun, much more like Pompeo, understands that the president is the president and that he makes the decisions, said a source close to the White House. Also considered to be in the running is Deputy Secretary of State John Sullivan, who had been expected to be named US Ambassador to Russia. White House spokesman Stephanie Grisham said many issues had led to the decision to ask for Bolton's resignation, but she wouldn't elaborate on what those issues were. Excuse me. Trump would sometimes chide Bolton about his hawkish ways in meetings, introducing him to visiting foreign leaders by saying, "You all know the great John Bolton. He'll bomb you. He'll take out your whole country." So we will look to see how that goes on. John Bolton, as we know, is, as the article said, a well-known hawk, and if this is helping Donald Trump tone down some of the hawkish rhetoric coming out of the US just now, we have to think that could be a good thing. In other news, in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu announced his intention on Tuesday to annex the Jordan Valley in the occupied West Bank if he wins next week's general election. In a broadcast live on Israeli TV channels, Netanyahu said today, "I announce my intention after the establishment of a new government to apply Israeli sovereignty to the Jordan Valley and the northern Dead Sea." Netanyahu, who is fighting for his political life in a closely contested election, reaffirmed a pledge to annex all Jewish settlements throughout the West Bank, but said such a move would not be made before publication of a long-awaited US peace plan and consultations with President Donald Trump. There was no immediate comment from Washington. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh, in a statement issued shortly before Netanyahu spoke, amid reports of a possible annexation announcement, said that the Israeli leader is a prime destroyer of the peace process. The Jordan Valley, which Palestinians seek for the eastern perimeter of a state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, stretches from the Dead Sea in the south to the Israeli city of Beit Shean in the north. Israel captured the West Bank in 1967. The 2,400 square kilometre valley accounts for nearly 30% of the territory in the West Bank. Israel has long said it intends to maintain military control there under any peace agreement with the Palestinians. And back in the UK, Geoffrey Boycott has come under significant criticism, or rather his knighthood has come under criticism from a leading domestic violence charity. And the cricketer himself has said he does not give a toss about that criticism. Adina Clare, the co-acting chief executive of Women's Aid, described the award of the knighthood as extremely disappointing, while Boycott told the BBC Radio 4 Today programme presenter Martha Kearney, "I don't give a toss about her, love." The honour, which was part of Theresa May's resignation honours list, sparked controversy because of Boycott's 1998 conviction for assaulting his then-girlfriend Margaret Moore, who was left with black eyes and bruising to her forehead. A French court fined him £5,000 and handed down a 3-month suspended jail sentence. He has always denied the charge, maintaining Moore's injuries were sustained in an accidental fall. At his trial, public prosecutor Jean-Yves Duval rejected that claim, saying the injuries were absolutely incompatible with an accident. Adina Clare said, "Celebrating a man who was convicted for assaulting his partner sends a dangerous message that domestic abuse is not taken seriously as a crime. With increasing awareness of domestic abuse and a domestic abuse bill ready to be taken forward by government, it is extremely disappointing that a knighthood has been recommended for Geoffrey Boycott, who is a convicted perpetrator of domestic abuse." Theresa May, who introduced a landmark domestic abuse bill to Parliament earlier this year, gave Boycott the knighthood for services to sport in her resignation honours list. A spokesman for the Women's Trust said it's disappointing to see Geoffrey Boycott included in Theresa May's honours list, given her vocal support for domestic abuse survivors and the domestic abuse bill. While we welcome the recent domestic abuse bill for its work to widen the definition of domestic abuse, the inclusion of Geoffrey Boycott in the honours list shows just how much of our attitude as a society needs to change when it comes to supporting survivors. In an extraordinary exchange on the Today programme, Kearney asked why Boycott had not been given the honour sooner and suggested that one reason could be the conviction. The former cricketer proclaimed his innocence and cited his outspoken support for Brexit. He went on to say, "You can take your political nature and do whatever you want with it. and claimed that the presumption of innocence was reversed in the French legal system, although of course in France, as in England, Wales and Scotland, defendants are presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. He said, 25 years ago, love, in a French court she tried to blackmail me for £1 million. I said no, because in England if you pay any money at all we think, hang on, there must be something there. I said, I'm not paying anything. I'm not sure I'd actually got £1 million at the time. It's a court case in France where you're guilty, which is one of the reasons I didn't vote to remain in Europe, because you're guilty until you're proved innocent. That's totally the opposite from England, and it's very difficult to prove you're innocent in another country and in another language. Most people in England don't believe it. I didn't do it. Move on. It's a cross I have to bear, right or wrong, good or bad, I have to live with it. And I do because I'm clear in my mind, and I think most people in England are that it's not true. I don't give a toss about her, love. It was 25 years ago. You can take your political nature and do whatever you want with it. You want to talk about my knighthood? It's very nice of you to have me, but I couldn't give a toss. This is the same Geoffrey Boycott who was forced to apologise in 2017 for suggesting that he would have to black up to be considered awarded for a knighthood. He's alleged to have said that the honour was handed out like confetti to West Indies cricketers, saying, mine's been turned down twice, I'd better black me face. So, we also now have some news from an IMF Article 4 report on Montenegro. This is a report. The Article 4 consultation happens on a regular basis with all IMF member countries. And this report said that Montenegro has enjoyed strong economic growth in recent years, boosted by the implementation of several large investment projects. Staff project that the economy will continue to expand by 3% in 2019 and 2.5% in 2020, as the end of a major highway construction starts to slow down their growth rate. Government debt has gone up a little, but it is expected to come down as the 2017 fiscal consolidation strategy has brought the debt and the deficit under much better control. The banking sector in Montenegro is doing very well, exhibiting improved asset quality, strong credit growth, high liquidity, and it's very well capitalised, despite the government recently having to intervene in two domestic banks which weren't doing so well. However, they did highlight that Montenegro's ability to absorb shocks was limited by its lack of an independent currency, because Montenegro uses the euro, although it's not officially a Eurozone member. Low labour productivity and employment levels and a large informal sector also limit positive growth. So this was just some very interesting information. Obviously, Montenegro is a very small country in a less buoyant and less successful part of Europe than Scotland, but it is doing extremely well for such a small country, a country that was relatively undeveloped until relatively recently, and which is only just beginning to establish itself, really has only relatively recently established itself as an independent country. It is doing very, very well and gives us a lot of pointers for Scotland in the future. Its tourism sector is buoyant, as we said. Its banking sector is doing very well. And again, there are several small countries all over Europe, several countries much smaller than Scotland, doing very, very well. And it should be a sign of things to come for Scotland if we do things right. Also in the EU, the EU, of course, does have business to carry out that is not about Brexit. And so the incoming head of the EU executive named her 27-strong team on Tuesday, promising that it would focus on addressing changes in the climate, technology and demography that are generating anxieties in communities across what is still a 28-member bloc. Germany's Ursula von der Leyen appointed this College of Commissioners, which will take office on November the 1st, assuming that they secure the approval from the European Parliament. However, even that is not a given, after it only very narrowly backed von der Leyen herself back in July. So amongst the key roles, Denmark's Margrethe Vestager has been put in charge of, will remain in charge of competition policy. Irishman Phil Hogan is in charge of trade. We mentioned him earlier. That's a crucial position because it will involve the settlement of the future relationship between the EU and Brexit Britain. Von der Leyen will become the first woman to head the European Commission after promising a platform of a greener, fairer and a rule-based Europe. The team that she's proposing offers a rough gender balance, which is generally considered a plus point for lawmakers in the EU. There are 13 women on the team and 14 men. Von der Leyen said, "This team will shape the European way. We will take bold action against climate change, build our partnership with the United States, define our relations with a more self-assertive China, and be a reliable neighbour, for example, to Africa. This team will have to stand up for our values and world-class standards. My commission will be a geopolitical commission committed to sustainable policies, and I want the European Union to be the guardian of multilateralism, because we know that we are stronger by doing together what we cannot do alone." Back in Britain, the grid operator, National Grid, has said that train systems need a review after a major blackout in August. Systems that secure Britain's power supplies and keep trains running should be reviewed after a blackout caused by a lightning strike and unexpected power outages last month created chaos. An outage lasting about an hour on the evening of August 9th cut off 1.1 million electricity customers, including homes, businesses, a hospital and Newcastle Airport, as well as causing severe disruption on the rail network. A lightning strike and unexpected generation losses resulted in more than 1 gigawatt of supply going offline and a large drop in frequency of electricity running through the grid. In its final technical report to Ofgem, the regulator, National Grid said that there should be a review of the electricity grid system to ensure it was resilient as the scale of power generation loss exceeded normal protection standards. It also said that internal protection systems on electric trains should be reviewed to ensure they could continue to operate through disturbances in the system, such as a drop in frequency, one of the reasons that several trains had stopped running. And this is something that is only going to become a bigger concern over time. The state of our grid is a key factor in our energy efficiency and our energy use as a nation. And much of that grid is very old and somewhat fragile. We would definitely like to see improvements. In Scotland, public sector employment has fallen very slightly. There has been a net decrease of 0.8%, that's 4,200 jobs. However, there were increases in headcount in the devolved civil service, in other public bodies, in further education colleges, in NHS staff and in police and fire, as well as increases in local government headcount by 6,800, which was mainly due to Cordia services being brought back in-house by Glasgow City Council. The vast bulk of the decrease in headcount is really a technical reclassification rather than a particular change to employment levels, as registered social landlords, essentially the housing associations that have taken over council housing in most areas now, are now being reclassified as private sector organisations rather than public sector, although in most regards, they are really an arm's length organisation. They still have a public sector mandate. But this is very interesting to see. 21% of total employment in Scotland is in the public sector, 79% obviously in the private sector. But great to see increases in staff in the NHS, in police and fire services, in education. These are all things that I think most Scots would welcome. And in other Scottish news, Scotland's chief statistician, has released the latest council tax reduction, or CTR, estimates. In June 2019, Scotland's CTR scheme supported 472,640 households, and the total weekly income foregone by local authorities was £6.6 million. The total number of CTR recipients in June 2019 was 14.4% less that's 79,740 recipients, than it was when the scheme started back in April 2013. Generally, the decline in the number of recipients has been gradual over this period. However, increases in reforms to council tax and CTR in April 2017 and further increases in council tax in April 2018 and 2019 has resulted in additional increases in income foregone. The agreement between the Scottish Government and local government for locally determined council tax increases to be capped at 4.79% in 29-20 reflects the increase in weekly income foregone in April 2019. Excuse me, my throat is very dry tonight. So, in other news, feedback is being sought on active travel for the Aviemore to Carbridge route. There will be public exhibitions held on September 25th and 26th on the non-motorised user Aviemore to Carbridge route study. Local communities will be able to see and comment on the corridor options that have been developed for the active travel route linking these two communities. A Transport Scotland spokesperson said Transport Scotland is continuing to work with the Cairngorm National Park Authority, the Highland Council, Highlands and Islands Transport Partnership and Sustrans to deliver the Aviemore to Carbridge non-motorised user route study. Public exhibitions are being held on September 25th and 26th to provide an update on the ongoing work and seek feedback on the corridor options that have been developed for a route linking Aviemore and Cartbridge. I would urge anyone with an interest in the proposed scheme to attend one of the exhibitions or view the material online and give us their views on the proposed options. Pete Crane, the Cairngorm National Park Authority's Head of Visitor Services, said, "There is great support from communities across the Strath, from Lagan to Granton and Spey, for better, safer, active travel, and we also know from surveys that once here, more and more visitors want to get around on bike or on foot. With regards to the climate emergency, we need to drive less, and for our own health, we need to exercise more. So we're really pleased to see that Transport Scotland want to hear from us all about the best route for a multi-use path from Aviemore to Carbridge. An off-road route that will let us walk and cycle and electric bike more often, more enjoyably and more safely." So those two events, as said, they're on the 25th and 26th of September. The one on Wednesday the 25th is from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Aviemore Community Centre in Muirton. And the Thursday 26th September will be from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. at Carbridge Village Hall on the main road in Carbridge. We would strongly encourage anybody who is in the area, who does have an interest in these issues, to get involved in these. It's only by getting involved in these consultations that we can always make our voices heard in policy development, and definitely that sounds like an interesting project that people in the area will want to get involved in. And finally tonight, it has been confirmed that Glasgow will host the UN Climate Conference COP26 next year. Climate Secretary Rosanna Cunningham said, "I am pleased that Glasgow has been confirmed as the host city of COP26, now that the joint UK and Italy bid to host the summit has been approved. It is right that this conference should come to Scotland, given our leadership in climate action. Scotland was one of the first countries in the world to acknowledge the global climate emergency, and the Scottish Government has introduced the toughest targets in the UK to ensure our action matches the scale of our climate ambitions. We look forward to working collaboratively with partners to deliver an ambitious and effective conference that ensures Scotland plays a leading role to help promote the increased global effort to tackle climate change. I have no doubt that Glasgow will deliver a highly successful conference, and I look forward to welcoming delegates to Scotland." And the Greens also commented on this. Glasgow MSP Patrick Harvey and co-leader of the Green Party said, "I welcome the announcement that Glasgow is to host this major global climate conference. The science is clear. We have just a decade left to take the bold and urgent action required to transform our economy so that it works for people and planet. I am hopeful that hosting this event will focus minds and embolden both the Scottish and UK governments to recognise the scale of the challenge we face and set to work focusing all the levers of government towards tackling the climate emergency. Here at home, we know that a Scottish Green New Deal will create hundreds of thousands of good quality jobs as we transition from a reliance on oil and gas to the renewable technologies of the future. This can be replicated globally. The fight against the climate crisis is being led by young activists across the planet who have recognised the damage we are doing to our planet. I am delighted that the fight back against this emergency will begin in Glasgow. And certainly we are also delighted by that, and I'm quite sure that Broadcasting Scotland will be keeping you very closely updated on that conference when it happens. That is all the news for this evening. Again, we're sorry there wasn't a guest for you tonight. We know you enjoy the conversations that we have here, but sadly it's been very difficult at these last couple of weeks to get guests in every night. We do have a short list, and we will I'm sure have a guest in tomorrow night to talk to. But in the meantime, please do remember, folks, that producing TV programs is an expensive business. To allow us to continue to make programs and just to keep the lights on here in the studio, we do need more people to sign up as Broadcasting Scotland supporters. You can see on the screen now, just below me, become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter at broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Your £5 a month makes a huge difference. And as I've said several times here, if we can acquire 300 more subscribers, we have a new Scottish Question Time type show that we're ready to take on the road around Scotland as soon as we have the budget to make it happen. That's 300 people a month. That adds up to just 1,500 quid. But that's enough for us to take a show on the road like that. So please do get on that. Remember, there is a very good chance that there will be an election and potentially even one or even two more referendums coming up in the not too distant future. These are issues where we will want to get our politicians on camera talking about the big issues, and this is the best way to make it happen. So do please, as we said, go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register to sign up as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. In the meantime, our shows will always remain free to view, and we will always welcome any and all viewers. We'll just quietly like the ones who give us £5 a month, a wee bit more. So thank you very much again for joining us. My name is Kenny McBride. This has been Scotland at 7, and this is Broadcasting Scotland. Thank you and good night.